on behalf of the publics, and I use that deliberately in the plural, that we serve.
So have we got any final comments anybody wants to throw in? Okay, so we'll make sure this afternoon in the workshop there's plenty of opportunity for working through it. Easy. Next item on the agenda is down to you, terms of reference for the Governor's Development Committee.
So we had a discussion at the Governor Development Committee about the terms of reference and whether they were still fit for purpose, and what you have in front of you is a very short paper that sets out the key proposed changes, and the changes are highlighted within the terms of reference. So I hope we can take it as read and we can take any questions that people may have. Otherwise I'd hope we can approve those.
Everybody okay with those?
Simple. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mike, I think you're next. Membership Development Committee.
Good morning, Mike Hill, Public Governor for Surrey, and now, according to my new nameplate, North East Hampshire. Standard report covers the Membership Development Council, Foundation Council and the Inclusion Hub. 16 pages. I don't think I need to go through it blow by blow. The minutes are there for MDC and the Foundation Council the 16th of May. There was another Foundation Council, I believe, on the 21st of July, and the minutes will be published in due course. There was an IHAG Inclusion Hub on the 14th of July, and again, the minutes of that will be published in due course. Would like to make the point, though, that all governors are welcome to attend all committees, membership development, government governor development, whatever, as an observer or a participant, or whatever. We would welcome to see anybody at all the meetings. The more the merrier. One thing I would like to point out, Geraint didn't cover it earlier, my predecessor as the chair of the Membership Development Committee was Angela Rayner, who was the Trust Inclusion Manager. I think it's worth pointing out SECAM was awarded the gold standard for the 3rd year running of the National Awards Ceremony at the Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion. I think is actually an incredible achievement, and I think we ought to congratulate Angela and her team on that. The only other thing, a couple of things I've got, annual membership meeting reminder, Brighton Racecourse, Tuesday the 27th of September. I don't know when the next Foundation Council meeting is, I haven't been advised of that. Next Membership Development Council is the 16th of November, next Inclusion Hub is the 13th of October. Any questions at all? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Brian, Governor Development Committee.
The Governor Development Committee, it's enclosure F in your papers, met on the 30th of June. It was a lengthy meeting, and just to pick up on Mike's well-made point, it is open to all governors to attend, and actually it's valuable if you are able to be there because of the contributions that can be made. And it very much feeds into what happens subsequently on the issues of governance, and certainly feeds into this afternoon's session, and I'm not going to repeat myself now and then because I shall cover some of that ground then. But it was a lengthy meeting because there was a lot of discussion around the previous COG, and that took up what should have been the time when we'd have developed the governance proposals. And out of that came a separate half-day session to which everyone was invited, where we had a very lengthy discussion on those issues, which again I will cover this afternoon. The recommendation is you're asked to note the report of that committee.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Governor Activities and Queries.
Thank you. This is paper G in your set of papers, and item on the agenda of 2416. And again, maybe the warm weather has encouraged you, but you barely need any encouragement to engage so actively in so many community activities to promote SECAM and your role and engage with the public. And you have, as ever there, a very long list of activities with which you engaged. As always, I would always remind you to make sure you record on SurveyMonkey any activities that you undertake, because I think it is of value in mapping against the members we gain. And at public events, we do so well at gaining additional members. And the other reminder that I customarily give, and it's so important, is that if you have general inquiries and requests for information, they should be processed through ISI and not taken up individually around the trust.
Okay.
This also gives us an opportunity here to pick up on other issues where we've raised queries. And normally, I think our reasonable expectation would be that there is actually the answer to those queries. So not only are we raising them as issues, and that might be at the board, through ISI, through the proper processes we have, but we'd see what the result was, and we all share that, which is what we as a council do. There are two there which have been around a time. And one of those is the one Michael alluded to this morning. And I'll pick Michael's point up, I think, second. The first point was I had raised through the board queries concerning slippage of call answering times at EOCs and had asked questions around the longest tail of those calls. That is only one measure of our effectiveness, but on the basis that our callers don't get a response of any sort until the call is actually answered, that is a period of time where patients can disbenefit from the service we provide if we're only looking at a measurement of response times. And the tail was a very long tail. An unacceptably long tail was the answer given at that time. And you will see even now in the integrated dashboard that call answering times still fall far short. The remedy that was suggested then when the question was first proposed is we have a large cadre of people in training as EMAs, and that was seen to be the way forward. This subject again came up at the board this week, and largely the answer was the same. And I do seriously worry that actually the attrition, in whatever form, exceeds whatever the recruitment and that cadre coming through. And therefore, I'm going to look to our non-executive director colleagues to assure us of how they seek assurance that that process is gaining on what was a serious area of deficiency. And if I might, I can take both questions together if I might, Graham.
Should we deal with this one first? Because I think it's obviously quite an important one. I don't know whether, Lucy, you want to say what you've been doing. Because obviously we're very aware that the performance isn't what it needs to be at this moment in time. And you know, clearly the patient experience, therefore, is going to be suffering. So I think it's something you've been looking at.
So specifically on, I'll pick up the tail. So at the RMCGC that was, we would regularly get a tail report come, which was actually a very good report. So it was one of the better reports that we would receive. And that would look at the tail and the impact of the tail. Now, since everything that's happened in March and the change of governance, RMCGC obviously is no longer, and we're now the Quality and Patient Safety Committee, which is more of a scrutiny committee. But following the board on Tuesday, I had written to Andy and said that we should get a tail report done, particularly given the performance, because obviously the worse the performance, the longer the tail. And that should either come to the Quality Patient Safety Committee or the board. But I think we must look at it as a matter of urgency. So it was routinely being looked at, but there's been a bit of a hiatus of change. But it is definitely on my agenda, or it's now on Andy's agenda, to get that in place for a meeting in September, whether it be QPS or the board meeting.
And I think on call handling, I think you rightly identify that one of the things James Kennedy tried to focus on was improving that. Obviously, since he left and Ian has come in, Ian has picked that up. I think we are expecting to see that improvement imminently. I think we all share your concern that actually attrition is an enormous problem for us, and we've again challenged the exec to think about what they can do. We had a long discussion at the Finance Investment Committee around the 111 call handlers. So that's improved in the short term, but it's clearly a major issue for us, finding sufficient people of the right quality and then keeping them in the post.
They've also changed the way they recruit in EOC as well, is my understanding. So I think it was a standard recruitment process. I think they now go through a much more rigorous assessment type centre where they're put into what the job is actually like to try and get the attrition at the front of the process rather than the back. But it is absolutely clear, it was about a year ago, I think, that there was an issue in recruiting and we've not recovered from that. So I think you're exactly right over that period.
Just in terms of, we picked up the recruitment in the EOCs in the, it was WDC, it's now WWC, I keep calling it WWF, but WWC, Workforce and Wellbeing Committee. The reason you've got the same answer about there's a cadre coming through, there's about, I think it's 3 months, excuse me if I haven't got it right, but 3 months lag from recruited, going through the training to be actually on post. I'm fairly certain that that is still the same group going through, so it's not slipped anymore. They should be in post from September. So we are expected to start seeing some improvement from September because you've got operational people, and then you will see some of the recruitment. We are losing too many, but you know, they have to do it, but there will be an improvement in terms of the number of people in the EOC. And the other pleasing thing is we seem to be not suffering too much from the move to Crawley. We were a bit worried that moving to Crawley there would be a lot of people losing from the EOC. At the moment, there's a pretty good assurance that we will have sufficient people at Crawley to man all the desks and do everything we need.
Do you want to go into your second?
Could I? I'm perhaps too far away. I'll come and move up a bit closer afterwards. It's just a little bit difficult to follow, having just come back in, and I will be fully attending. I plan for the rest of the meeting. First of all, just in reverse order, the recruitment issues are you know, they look okay, and we talked about this at length in Foundation Council. 20% doesn't sound terrible, particularly in the context of what are quite good measures around sickness and so on. But actually, we know and understand that anecdotally there could be up to as much as 100% turnover in emergency medical advisors in the EOC, statistically speaking, not necessarily in terms of individuals, and that's something where we may wish to ask the non-executives to focus their energies, because getting the front end of our patient pathway right, we know has a very big impact on the rest of it. In relation to the tails, I was disappointed, Chair, that you asked the Chief Executive to report on the tail for Red 1 and Red 2 so close after my question around Green 2. And if I read an excerpt of an email that was sent to me some time ago from a paramedic colleague saying, talking about 1 week, in the first 4 days of this week, 153 patients requiring an emergency treatment or transport response, for example, Green 2, 30-minute emergency response, waited over 2 hours for a response, 44 waited over 4 hours, and the longest 9 hours. I really cannot impress enough how important for patients and safety of our population that we address the Green 2 issues. And what I would like to see by way of escalation is the 2 points that I made in my points to the Chief Executive around appraisals, which is really important about staff, and around Green 2 find their way into an action, an agenda point to be addressed in the future. And I would like to hear in greater detail how we understand what the relative risks are in our tails and how they impact on each other.
Lucy, could you just give a comment on what you do on the tail for the Greens, because I take the admonishment?
No, we, as you know, we have been focusing on the Reds, and so I'm looking at Andy to bring the Greens into that as well. So we have focused on the Reds in our tail review.
The second point, and I know there is some sympathy round the room on this particular issue, and I'll take it in its breadth and pick up Michael's point at the same time. Let me firstly take the data source, because for this issue it's very important that in the former board dashboard, A26, A27 was a record of the unique contribution made by CFRs to performance and the hours of their performance. In the new reporting, that is no longer visible. And at the time at which, from a peak of over 3% unique contribution, and by unique contribution, in other words, therefore first on scene and therefore counting as stopping the clock. And it's not about stopping the clock, it was about patient care, but you'll forgive me using that term. Our performance began to fall for reasons that some would suggest they know the reason for. But it fell to around 2.5%. And the then chief executive was very keen, because performance overall was challenged, that performance from CFRs, and I'll use the word performance, not one they'll enjoy using, but I'm using a metric that in terms of patient care you want to double the number of outputs. He wanted it to increase to 5%. And indeed our acting chief executive in a separate mail said at the ops team meeting it was being challenged to be 10%. Well, I can tell you since that time, regardless of whether it's now reported or not, responses fell to 1.2%. So they halved from a figure against which they were to climb, and indeed double. I am told, although I have not seen the data, that they are below that 1.2% now. Now, I am the first to say that community first responders are not the entirety of a solution for a patient, but they are a very valuable resource, and I'm sure no one would disagree with me, particularly with patients, the green twos that David has just highlighted, for example. Some response is certainly of value, and for Red 1, Red 2 calls of enormous value. And of course we see, again on our integrated reporting, that our ROSC figures are not good. And they're the kind of figures that CFRs can help influence. So, again, I look to our non-executive directors for assurance that it is on their agenda, that they're pressing for a way forward, because of all the assurances we have had as a COG, I have had over the last few years, none have delivered.
So I think what we are going to be doing with Ian is understanding what he believes needs to put in place over the near term. And I think we fully expect that CFRs are an important part of that. But I think at this moment in time we can't know the priority he's going to put on that. But clearly it makes a difference. And if you again look at his board paper, he's highlighted the impact of this on our Red 2 performance since 2 years ago, and it's significant. Trevor?
Yeah, I was having a discussion on a number of points with Ian earlier this week, and that included CFRs and indeed the fire. The areas where we can improve our performance given the recognition that we have real resource problems because we cannot manufacture the extra paramedics and so on that we need. Part of that was also around having, and we've talked about this when James was Ops Director in the past, but having appropriate provision within the backup at the in the EOCs, no matter who's calling in, because there needs to be a certain degree of clinical backup to enable people to have the confidence to do what they're doing out in the field. And that, to me, is an integral part of this. So it's very much on his radar, but I take the point, it was on other people's radar before. And there, I won't just say there hasn't been progress, you highlighted, Brian, things have gone backwards in many respects. And we need to harness the goodwill that there is in the CFR communities and to take that forward. It's also the use it or lose it thing. And if we don't use the best endeavours that we can get out of our CSR response, personally I believe we're missing a lot.
Michael?
On the subject of CFRs, this has been something that as a COG we've discussed on numerous occasions, and I'm looking forward to the update. But I can speak for my colleagues in Kent. There's lots of uncertainty at the moment as to what's going on, especially now there's been the change in the exec portfolios. You've got CFRs that sit under two different areas. Clinically, they sit under operations, but for governance, they sit under the paramedic director, which is potentially causing a bit of a conflict. And in Kent alone, you've lost their lead, their community partnership lead. And as I understand it, they're not going to recruit to that post. Thankfully, you've got people like Francesca Cole that are doing an exceptional job picking up the responsibility, but that's not a dedicated role for her. And the CFRs they're feeling as though they're not valued. They keep raising the same concerns about training, about recruitment, about communications, about lack of support from the EOCs. And it's stuff that we continue going around and around in circles. And we have moments where it gets exceptionally good, and you think, we've nailed it, it's working, and then it slips back again. And I hope now we've got this partnership arrangement with South Central, who do look after their CFRs very well, and have kind of had all the problems that we've had and found solutions to it that maybe that we can learn from them.
Just and not to sort of contradict Mike. So, for those that don't know, I'm also a team leader for one of the CFR groups in West Kent. Things are getting better, but the consistency around communication is always the issue. And I think there's also a lack of consistency in the information that's being provided to the leadership from an operational level. So if you asked Garant or Andy how the EOC staffed for CFRs at the moment, they'd say, well, we have a response desk. Now, in Coxheath, we have a response desk about 5% of the time at the moment. They're not aware of this. So I think there's some big organisational challenges, and I think with the move over to ops, that'll make things easier. I mean, West Kent CFRs, last quarter, 10,500 hours on call, 650 incidents. We're not meeting the 2%, 3% performance stats a lot of the time because we're not being dispatched quick enough. And we are being dispatched 5 minutes into the job. So if they can sort out that end of the communication tree, and that comes on to the communication stuff that I raised at the last COG, but it's around the EOC predominantly. At an operating unit level now we are part of operations, things are immeasurably better to where we were last year. There's a lot more engagement and there's an awful lot of green time being invested in our CPD. And I'm hoping that that's being reflected into the other parts of the trust. I assume it is, but it certainly is in West Kent. That allays some concerns.
Thank you. Well, I think it's a shared issue. I think I know amongst my non-exec colleagues, we believe we need to do a better job with CFRs, and we need to support them better. So let's see what we can do going forward. Okay, should we move on?
There is a third issue around inviting the audit manager from RSM. Do we have an update on that? Is he?
What's that about? Yes. I can't remember where we discussed it. I think it was at the Governor Development Committee. We're going to invite him along to present at the annual members meeting as our item of patient focus.
Marion.
Thank you. If I could ask a question about that, please, as I'm the mental health appointed governor to the COG. Does this relate to the presentation that we were given about 6 months ago?
This relates to where the council was asked to choose a quality indicator that you wanted to be audited. Yes.
So it's the report on the progress of that?
On the audit outcomes.
Thank you. And could I just ask, what does RSM stand for? As opposed to the Royal School of Music or Regimental Sergeant Major?
Company's name.
The company's.
It's lost in the mists of time.
Yeah.
They just call themselves RSM now. It used to be different names of companies, audit firms that merged
it's
together.
An audit firm?
It's an audit firm.
An external audit?
Yes.
Wasn't it as RSM Robson Road?
Yes.
That's fine, thank you.
Can I just give a bit of background on that as well, because the outcome of the audit which they conducted at the behest of governors actually resulted in an amber red rating, which is quite a serious position, and the issue which they found was that there was insufficient stability of data around mental health calls and whether the right approach was being adopted or not. And I think it points to a wider issue within the Trust, which is if you haven't got reliable data, then how do you know what you're trying to improve upon? And I'm sure Nick will give you a much fuller explanation, but that's the nub of it.
Thank you. And certainly from the perspective of Di and I, where we look at issues of Section 136 under the Mental Health Act conveyance, we know that sometimes the data that you gather depends on how the call was put in, whether it gets acknowledged as a mental health call or something else.
Yeah.
So, yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for that. So we move on to any questions we got from the public.
I've got one as well to read out.
I sent one in, but from what I've heard today, I think it has been answered. In response to the Chief Executive's plea, we're all in this together. And with the issues to be addressed to the CQC by the 10th of September, would it be appropriate for the staff and public governors to be more proactive and provide assistance to the board in answering some of these issues? Now, Charlie today has explained how he is going to get involved in making a presentation to all this, and that is quite encouraging. But what is not encouraging as a member of public is the disagreements or the conflicts of which are now in exist between the governors and the board. And I find that quite disturbing. If the board cannot satisfy the governors, how can the governors satisfy the members of the public? And one thing which, as a member of the public, stands out to me, and I hope the person's concerned when it gets discussed at board level is raising it as a conflict of issue, is that there are two directors which were mentioned in the original report on Red 3G5. Now, I'm not saying they have, but they could have a material interest in that because of their own position at the time. And that is clearly a conflict of interest. So that is another concern to me about being open. And I think that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
So hopefully this afternoon's workshop will help make sure that the non-execs and the Council of Governors are aligned, and that was what it was designed for, I think.
Firstly, Frank, I think it's very important that we listen to our stakeholder groups. Their views will not always be identical, but there's often significant overlap. And you'll have heard from the amount of work we have put in today and the work we are going to do on our governance and how we are to seek assurance that we really are focused on the issues that you raise.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay. So, Brian, areas to highlight to non-execs.
I think the areas to highlight are those areas where we have sought assurance. And again, I don't think going over each individually is going to benefit. They will be picked up in the action log, and we will return on each of those I suggest to you.
Okay. Chair. I was just thinking about how we make best use of the feedback and comments from around the table, so it just doesn't become a talking shop where people, try and saturate themselves by saying it. Instead, we need to make sure we action the stuff. And I wonder whether it would be useful to bring the list of actions and draft minutes to the GDC or another forum early, so that we can make sure that those actions are getting actioned and that we pick out the points that people make and do something about it.
I think the idea of having, because the idea of having this area is to highlight to the non-execs section. One is slightly pointless today because there's so many non-execs here, but in the context where there's less non-execs here, it was to highlight issues that have been raised by the COG, save non-execs having to wade through all the minutes and perhaps missing something. So I hope that that would be a separate one-side bit of paper which goes to the non-execs, and I suggest to the exec team as well, which says these were the key issues, queries that came up at the council meeting. So it's a slightly different thing from that. I'm really happy to bring the minutes and action log to the GDC.
You know, perhaps we should talk about it at GDC to make it an effective process, because it is our statutory assurance function, and making sure that the things that we want to seek assurance on are being recorded and then followed up. So I would anticipate at the following meeting, the things that we've raised today could be, you know, could be the subject of this agenda item.
Yep.
Any other business? Okay. Items for next agenda. Is that you, Izzy?
It's an opportunity. Well, it's an opportunity for anybody here who's not able to come to the Governor Development Committee to suggest items for the next agenda. Or alternatively, if people think of things afterwards, they can always feed them through me.
Just when it comes to the volunteering thing, it might be nice if we could have someone in green come and talk about how they're interacting with CFRs.
And then what?
How someone in green, one of the operational paramedics or someone, to come and talk to us about how they're interacting and engaging with CFRs. There's several things going on in Kent about how they improve relationships and CPD and stuff.
Yeah.
We actually discussed that at GDC, didn't we? And Izzy, were you going to reach out to Karen, I think, or check? Yeah, were you going to reach out to Karen or check whether Karen was the right person to be reached out to for that conversation?
On the item on volunteering more widely, because it's not just about CFRs, that will hopefully be Ian Ferguson who's able to come and talk about it.
Oh, cool.
I was thinking more like Francesca or someone down at Paddock Wood who can come and talk about how operationally they're doing more CPD, they're engaging, they're getting vehicles, communicating, different things that are being done.
Yeah, I've talked to Ian about it, but that would be useful.
So Ian's going to lead on the item, and
yes,
you'll feedback to him that
yeah.
maybe a bit more detail. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Review of meeting effectiveness. Well, obviously, better to have the real chair here, but he's allowed a holiday. I guess it's probably organised in advance of him being appointed. Well, anyway, I appreciate all your input. Obviously, a very difficult time for the trust, and it's really important that we get these issues out on the table. So, yeah, appreciate your openness. And I think we are due to meet at 1:15.
Yes, and lunch will be coming out any minute.
So it's going to be outside?
Yes.
Okay.
Just round the corner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.